All right, so we're gonna start with my first book review ever. The first book that I've read since starting this channel is Ender's Game, and I read it through the audio, went on a road trip, and picked it up. I had previously read Ender's Shadow, and so I knew the basic plot of the entire story. I knew what was going on. There wasn't a lot of surprises. Ender's Shadow follows one of the side characters, whereas Ender's Game follows the main character, Ender Wiggin. And so there was a lot more to the story than was previously given because of perspectives and whatnot. Ender's Game follows a boy named Ender Wiggin. He grows up in a world where he is what's called a third. He is the third child. 80 years ago, the Earth was attacked by an alien race the humans call buggers. There's a huge war. We've managed to fight them off twice. Propaganda, the world government, everything is focused on fighting off the next invasion. The government is looking for brilliant-minded children to be their next commanders. Ender's oldest brother was a little too violent, a little too psychopathic for them. And so they looked towards the next kid, Ender's sister, Valentine, and she was just too empathetic. She felt too much for others. The government then petitions and has Ender's parents have a third child. They want his parents to have a boy this time and hopefully kind of be in between his oldest brother and his sister as far as in the empathy scale. They're all equally brilliant. They're all off the charts smart. And so the story follows this 6-year-old boy, Ender, as he is monitored and then accepted into battle school. Only the best and the brightest are taken to battle school. And from there, commander school and onward. The book follows Ender as he's going through with a lot of interjections of the adults, the commanders and colonels, talking about Ender and their observations of him. They're often discussing what's being seen and what's going on with Ender, whether or not he is developing as they would like him to be. So Ender, as a character, is very interesting because he is, when we first meet him, he's only 6 years old. And even then is brilliant, off the charts, the smartest person that anybody has ever seen. But because he is bullied and tormented and tortured so much by his brother, he is scared of becoming him. So he's very non-violent. And that plays a huge part as the story progresses. And while this is going on, the adults, the colonels and generals and admirals are looking at him and monitoring him. The main adult that's monitoring him, his name's Colonel Graff. Colonel Graff is the officer in charge, foremost, of taking care of Ender and watching over him. As the story progresses, you're getting more and more of these little bits and pieces of information. You find out that the things that they're doing to Ender aren't necessarily the conventional way that they've been doing them for the last 80 years, trying to find this new commander. They're changing rules. They're really making him feel alone, which to a 6-year-old up until, I think the story ends when he's about 12, is an awful thing to do to a child, no matter how smart, no matter what the reasons. They specifically say at times he needs to think and know that there will be no adult to come and save him. They have these almost laser tag-like games in 0G where they're focusing on learning tactics, and if they show promise, then they move on to becoming commanders. They get to lead their own armies, and then from there move higher and higher. All right, so things that I liked. I loved the battle room. And anytime there was a battle, at the end of the audiobook, there's a bit where Orson Scott Card's talking about how he developed Ender's Game. It originally started as a short story, which he had bits and pieces. He knew he wanted the battle room. In space, you're not fighting a linear battle. You're not fighting, left, right, forward, back. You're fighting up, down, every angle that you can think of. And so in order to train commanders to think that specific way, they had to be taken as children. And so he really based everything around that concept, and it really showed. The tactics that were used by Ender and by the other teams and stuff, you could visualize it so well. You'd understand what's going on, which is really difficult when you're thinking of also in every direction. You're trying to understand where everybody is at any given time. The other part that I really enjoyed was these flight command interludes in between, where they're talking about what's going on with Ender. Because I, as an adult, although I follow and enjoy Ender's perspective, I am not necessarily being able to put myself in Ender's shoes. I'm seeing it as one of the adults watching Ender. A lot of the things that they bring up of like, well, how's this gonna affect us later on? How do we feel, the world's gonna judge us at the end of this? Things like that. It was very much the things that I was thinking as I was reading about Ender were things that were being talked about by the adults in these little interludes. Some of the things I did not like. Pacing was really weird. The book covers 6+ years, and these in between times when he's at school, they just kind of brush over them, which is fine because you can't cover 6 years in a book. It's not, as far as very specific things. But he would say things like Ender spent every free time in the game playing, and I'm just imagining this 6-year-old playing Minecraft or something. It's just constantly just beating their head against these puzzle games, trying to beat the game. There were parts where they would go back to Earth and follow Ender's siblings, and it felt really disjointed, but good. The last thing I did not like, and this is going to be a little bit of spoiler, so spoiler warning. Orson Scott Card talks about in the end, his next book, Speaker for the Dead. When he was trying to develop that, he realized he wanted Ender to be that main character for that book. So he went back and rewrote the short story into a full novel, and the epilogue type thing where you find out what happened. It spent another, good bit almost just setting up for the next book. And it felt very disjointed. You get to the point where you think, okay, it should be done. And then they just continue on almost like a preface or like a prologue for this coming book. And it just felt very odd that way. All right, so now we're going to get into my final thoughts. Once again, more spoilers because I'm going to talk about things that happen at the end of the book that I really liked, specifically talking about the twist. So if you haven't read Ender's Game, you might want to stop here. If not, let's get into it. So, it felt really weird. Ender, as brilliant as he is, to not recognize that with his growing attitude of the adults are just against me, they're withholding things, they're using me, not realizing, hey, I'm being developed to be a commander. How did he not get, oh, I'm actually commanding ships and we're actually doing real fights? It just felt very un-Ender-like at the end. They couldn't get anything over him. He was everything else that they threw at him, he knew what they were doing. He understood what was going on. But yet, at the very end, the big thing that's going on, these marathon battles and things that they're putting him through, he doesn't pick up on, oh, these are real battles. We're actually commanding real pilots to fight and die and whatnot. Especially with the big suicide mission at the end, where he wiped out the entire planet, but also, through his command, many pilots were killed. Which goes into do the ends justify the means? The thing that I did like, though, was they get to that final planet. They almost felt like almost shoehorned in, where it was like, oh, hey, by the way, these buggers that you have not been able to, you know, nothing about, you find out the technology that the hive mindness that they had, we were able to replicate through technology. Through doing so, those buggers were able to then get in and get to know Ender and set up the big message for him. Once somehow they knew that Ender was going to end up at this planet. They were going to get him in. They were going to give him the queen's egg to then propagate and be able to live on. Somehow they assumed, and they were able to know that all these things were going to happen 70, 80 years in the future. Overall, though, I did really enjoy this book. I got to the end, and it served its purpose. I then went and bought the entire rest of the Ender's Game quartet. I want to see where this continues to go. I am very excited to get into Speaker for the Dead and the rest of the series. I'll probably end up reading that here in the next couple months. Let me know what you think. Have you read Ender's Game? What do you think? Do you think I am way off on my opinions? Let me know. That was the whole point of me making this channel, is to have that discussion. Comment down below with your thoughts. Let me know. Have you read it? What'd you think? If you haven't read it, are you going to? That's all I have for today, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.